Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 230, Gleanings of a Mystic. Now of course this work is about mysticism, but it's also Rosicrucian. It's from Max Heindel, one of the foremost figures of Rosicrucianism. This is a compilation of short essays into a book. It would be like 50 pages longer, but the number of ads for other works at the back of the book was scary, so I just redacted it all, and that reduced the page length considerably. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books blogs also in the description. I do have several other works on Rosicrucianism. I also have plenty of works on like the Hermetic sort of mystic trifecta there, involving plenty of works that deal with Masonry, works that deal with Theosophy, some of these other various mystic and occult schools throughout time. Now this particular work, because it's a compilation of shorter essays that have been compiled, it's on disparate topics, and so it doesn't really follow a linear format. It sort of jumps around. Some of it is on like the nature of initiation. Gender actually plays a role, like talking about males and females for mystic purposes. Some of that. It gets into sort of the origin of mankind, Atlantis sort of material, the root race stuff, the post-Blavatsky, really, almost proto-eugenics material. Although it's quite clear that Heindel, like all Rosicrucians of the era, was not a racialist. In fact, was a very cosmopolitan individual. Basically, a lot of these occult groups, Theosophy did this too, were extremely inviting towards people who were, in the Victorian sense, they were not white Anglo-Saxons. And so other groups in polite company, typically back then among people who were literate, would have been looked down on usually, but the Theosophists and Rosicrucians and stuff really didn't. They didn't have a problem with admitting people of both genders and various racial and ethnic backgrounds. It was interesting. They're the more welcoming version of the Masons, maybe, for some purposes. They're an interesting group, the Rosicrucians. It talks a little bit about mortality, reincarnation, that sort of thing, spiritual discernment, philosophy in the basic sense, how to live one's life. It involves, there's a passage in there that's in favor of temperance, loosely. There's also another one, it's interesting, most people don't know this. If you haven't studied sort of, history in a general sense in any depth, you probably don't realize this, but at the time, when we're talking about like the early 20th century, late 19th century, people thought sugar was good for you and or was medicinal because it was fairly scarce, and so like people would take tonics that were like sugar water and shit like that. Now, of course, we realize that replacing your beer with high sugar intake is not actually like a great idea, but back then they thought so. They actually, when sugar in the semi-refined sense was first being developed, in both India and in Central Asia, like some of the Islamic nations of Persia, into the Ottoman Empire, what would become the Ottoman Empire anyway. When sugar was being semi-refined there, it was exported very expensively to Europe, and it was used as a medicine. I suppose giving yourself a shot of energy when your diet consists of rough grains and shit like that, yeah, I guess it could have stimulated your immune system maybe a little bit, kinda, sorta. The diabetes not exactly a problem with the average medieval individual unless they were in the king's court constantly eating, cordial cherries and shit like that. But it's an interesting book. I'd highly recommend it. If you're into that sort of mystic thought of the early 20th century, especially with the Rosicrucian bent, this is definitely a work for you, and it's more easily read than some Rosicrucian and similar works. Some of them can be kind of dense and flowery and theatrical. This one's very straightforward. The writing is much more plain. This is for people who don't have any introductory knowledge of Rosicrucianism. By the time you read through it, fully, you'll understand the basic premise of their order, which I find quite nice. And as always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books blogs. Again, there are other works available within that general lexicon of material. It's under the mysticism category, but I could have put it under the spirituality header. It fits under both, literally. That's about all. Peace out.